Representation matters. But as indigenous Chicano people, we can't just sit back and wait for mainstream media outlets to make it happen for us. And nor should we. We started the Tales from Atlantis podcast because we believe that it is imperative for Chicanos, Chicanas, and Chicanx people to produce our own media and tell our own stories. And the way we choose to do this is by using Buzzsprout to host the podcast. Buzzsprout is by far the easiest and best way to launch a professional podcast. You'll get a podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and much more. To start your own podcast and get a $20 Amazon gift card, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and helps support the show. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast. Now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so, and why that's so, and why that's so, and why.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of Tales from Atlantis. I am your host, Kurly Tlapoyawa. Ruben Ariano Tlacatecat could not make it. He is busy with duties associated with the university, so unfortunately he could not be here today. But I'm here, flying solo, and today we have a very special guest, my good friend and boss, also, interestingly enough. So I better mind my P's and Q's. Miguel Puga. Miguel Puga is a storyboard supervisor, director, and creative producer on the Casagrandes. He previously served as a storyboard supervisor on The Loud House and was also a storyboard artist on Breadwinners, Shimmer and Shine, and the last two seasons of the Fairly OddParents, which is like one of my kids' favorite shows when they were little. So props for that. I really liked that show too. Outside of Nickelodeon, other cartoons he has worked on include Pink Panther and Pals, Futurama, The Looney Tunes Show, Gravity Falls, and Clarence. So Miguel Puga, we are glad to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I wish I had a cooler voice to hop in on this. You make it sound so cool. Gotta work on it. You should do some voice acting, Kurly.
I want to, interestingly enough, oddly enough.
Yeah. So
we met because you reached out on Facebook, I think. You had seen some of the Café con Nahuatl videos or some of the historical videos that I had done on YouTube, and you sent a message, and that's how we came to know each other. And we're working now on two projects, two super top secret projects that hopefully we'll be able to talk about in the near future that they get announced.
Yeah, we got a couple things cooking up, and one of them, two of, like, we've been working on this project for a while, which is something very personal with me, and I'm glad I reached out to you, and I scorched the earth trying to find, like, all right, who's the perfect person for this role to help me understand and learn and make sure I get things right and not just like make things up on the way or just put a blanket over, the Mesoamerican culture. Just like, hey, we're going to do a specific thing. Let's do this. If we make up a different culture just for in case we need to do it, at least we're going to be borrowing things that are still true to today that we're still using. And you're teaching me all this great stuff about the Purépecha and all different peoples across Mexico, and it's been an awesome ride. And That's just one project.
It's been so
That's just
fun.
one project. And then we have another one that's been, we're already, halfway through production on it at Nickelodeon, and it's very exciting. And that's another homage to, I guess I could say this, to my family and to Michoacan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been so cool and so fun too, because when I was a kid, I would watch all of the Charlie Brown specials, and I would see that name pop up, Bill Melendez, and I'm like, man, Bill Melendez, who's that guy? But we didn't have the internet back then. This was like, I was really, really young, but it put this fire in me, like, wow, man, there's like, because as far as I knew, he was a Chicano, right? Like, I saw the name and I was like, oh man, there's like a Chicano working on Peanuts. That's really cool. And it just sparked this interest to always work in animation, but I never had the outlet, right? There was no software available back then. We didn't have a computer. We were years and years and years away of ever owning a computer in my family. And I had, aside from creating the little flip books, to learn how to do animation, that was like the extent of anything I had ever done with animation. So now being able to work, in the industry and like have a hand in it and have it be something so cool too, right? That's like directly related to our culture. That's really exciting. So thank you very much for that opportunity. It's been super cool. But speaking of inspirations, I wanted to ask you, so how did you get started? Like, what was the impetus of your career? What sparked it?
I mean, just being around family and culture and just seeing how art is a big thing in our community. It's because I'm from Boyle Heights, East LA. So I grew up with all the murals at the I'm gonna call them VNE projects because I don't know what they're actually called. But if you go down 8th Street, it's a very, very famous. I'm sorry, go down Olympic. It's a very famous mural section with all the projects, and they've been around since like the 70s or maybe late 60s. So I've been around art my entire life, even when my cousins, they had like their cholo tattoos, and I always knew like, oh, that's cool, like art's around us. I want to do art. I had cousins that were already artists when I was a kid, and they would do like things here and there, just drawing on paper or helping out and painting some windows at shops and stuff. But they always used it as like a job. It wasn't something that like, hey, this is fun or whatever. But for me, I could sit down as a kid. One thing I remember my dad saying is, I could sit you down with a full stack of white paper and a pencil and an eraser and a sharpener, leave you there for hours. And I still love that. And when I didn't have that, my dad would give me La Opinión, the newspaper.
Yeah.
And I would trace with the ink pen, just the pictures. And I would just spend hours there just tracing all those pictures that you found in the Opinión, because I don't know, whatever paper they were using, it was way better than anything that we had with the LA Times. So it felt cool, and I started like cutting out those pages and putting them up. And I grew up in a rough neighborhood in the 90s, and there was a lot of gang activity and shootings. And so one thing that my parents tried to do was keep us indoors and, try to keep us safe. But we did have one comic book store in East LA. It's no longer there anymore. But I remember riding my bike there and buying my first comic when I was like 7 or 8 with my brother. We actually snuck out and rode our bikes, and there was a drive-by that same time.
Damn.
So it was very scary, and it was just like, yeah, we're never going to do it again. We did it again like the next month. But it was something that I just fell in love with the comic books. I fell in love with the cartoons, and I knew right away that I wanted to draw. Like in kinder, every kid draws. In preschool, every kid draws. But it's those that stick with it that they just like doodle. Sometimes when you doodle, and I know Kurly, you draw too. So like when you doodle, it's like you kind of zone out, and it helps me relax, and it helped me relax as a kid. So I always saw that. I was like, as I drew this, I realized that I was making people laugh or smile with my drawings. And I think that was the first spark where I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, maybe I could do this for a living. I didn't know what it was. I knew about Disney. I knew about, like, watching Peanuts, all those Peanuts specials. And that was one of the first things I noticed, too, was Bill Melendez's name. I was like, hey, he's just like us. And I remember watching it Thanksgiving Day here at my grandmother's house with my family. And everyone was like, doing their own thing. When that show came on, they all stopped and laughed and watched it. And I was just like, I want to do this. I want to make people laugh. And I don't know if that's part of me being the youngest kid that I just seek attention, but I always wanted to do that. And I'm glad I'm doing it now because I'm making, kids laugh. And I'm doing this for, now that I work on the Casagrandes. It was always fun to kind of go back and see, like, how did we do things? How did we handle holidays? Or what did we do differently? It's just like a bridge into the Latino home or Mexican-American home. And that was always the best part, is collaborating with other, people of color in the industry. And we got to bounce ideas off of each other and just finding out what different cultures do, and what also how similar our other cultures could be with ours, and especially the chancla. The chancla is universal. If you don't, like, if you see a chancla, if you see someone holding up a chancla, you know what's coming next. Yeah.
Do you remember what comic books you were really into when you were a kid?
Yeah, Spider-Man. So I remember picking up I grew up loving Spider-Man. I have no idea why, but my mom put on some pajamas, Spider-Man pajamas. I never took them off. Spider-Man, Superman, but the first comic I actually bought was the Street Fighter comic in like 93. And I was just like, whoa, this is cool. I didn't know, like, you could draw this, like, the eyes and how the characters look cool. And then I started buying more Spider-Man comics, and that's where I kind of fell in love with Spider-Man.
I think it's the fact that Peter Parker, like, grew up poor.
Yeah.
That, like, and was, like, really into school because I was a nerdy kid. So I just kind of associated with Peter Parker and fantasized, like, because it could be anybody under that mask, right? Like, anybody could be Spider-Man. Yeah. And I had the Spider-Man underoos. You know what underoos were? And we lived in a trailer park. So trailers are tiny, man. I always tell my wife, I'm like, I'll do anything in this life that it takes, but I really don't want to ever have to live in a trailer again, because I grew up in trailers. But the hall was so tiny that you could, like, wedge yourself on the side and climb up the walls. And so I was doing, like, all this crazy Ninja Warrior stuff throughout the trailer, wearing Spider-Man underoos. So yeah, I love Spidey. Spidey's hands down my favorite.
Is that your origin to being a stuntman? Spider-Man underoos?
Yeah, I guess, right? That and The Fall Guy. I don't know if you ever used to watch The Fall Guy.
No.
You're way younger than me. There was a TV show in the 80s called The Fall Guy about a stuntman named Colt Seaver who drove this badass truck, and he also he would work on the side as, like, I think he was like a private detective, or he was a bondsman, somebody that would go out and a bounty hunter, I guess they call them. Cool. So, but watching that was like, wow, that's awesome. And then I would try to mimic the stuff that if he did something cool on a motorcycle, I would jump on my bike and try to do it. everybody thought that I was really bad at riding a bike because I was falling off of it all the time. And like, man, this kid sucks at riding a bike.
It's not right with Kurly anymore.
Yeah.
That's that. Oh, that's funny. That's cool. I wonder if that's what Drive the movie was kind of loosely based off of.
Yeah, well, Drive, which is one of my favorite movies, it's really similar to a movie that came out in the 70s called The Driver, which if the listeners haven't seen it, they should check it out because it's a pretty awesome movie. So you grew up, you're into Spider-Man, and I'm like, did you go to college? Like, was that your plan? You were like, I'm going to go to college or an art and design school and learn how to do illustration and animation?
Yeah, I always knew I wanted to draw, and my parents would ship us out. I wouldn't say ship us out, but my brother and I and my family will go to Michoacan every summer, every winter with the family, and that was like I was in between of like, do I want to be a firefighter, an archaeologist, or I want to work in art? And it was the coolest thing was going to Mexico and seeing my cousins already. I must have been like 15 when it finally hit me. Was seeing all my cousins going off to college in Mexico, and some of them were going to Europe, and some of them were going to Canada, and they're all taking like different courses. Some were taking like they did everything. They did painting, they did animation art, they did. Some were going to school for math, some were going for school for economics and all this stuff that I was like, I couldn't wrap my head around, but they would all sit down and paint. And I was like, man, like, because I'm way behind if I need to sit down and paint. So that was like that summer I spent a lot of time drawing and painting. I can't paint now, but I learned a few things here and there. But one of the best things that I got to paint was in Michoacan, in the town that my parents are from. It's called Jacona, which is right next door to Zamora. There's this big giant hill. It's called El Curutaran, and people always say like, hey, that's a pyramid, but luckily they've gone inside and checked. They found a lot of artifacts. They found a lot of like some of the stuff you sent pictures of, like that's stuff that, I walked up there and I just grabbed it and I put it in my pocket and I brought it home. And then my aunt had made me throw it away because she's like, that could be cursed.
Yeah.
I was like, oh. But that was one of the first things that I realized. I was like, this is cool. And I was drawing everything. I was drawing like the steps that I found, like a lot of these swirls, like it's Purepecha swirls, which it looks like the first thing you see is like, well, what is this? It kind of looks like the Fifth Element kind of things that they use at the end of the movie. I forgot what happens at the end, but they use it. They have to blow sweat, sand, wind. And I remember drawing that stuff and drawing just like people and the people around there. And I was like, all right, I got to decide. I was at the crossroads, like, all right, what do I want to do? If if I go that archaeologist route, I know I can still draw, or do I want to make people laugh and, have fun and not sit in the sun?
Yeah.
So
there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. So I always had that in mind, that I always wanted to draw in some way or form. And I even looked into being a police artist, sketch artist.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that, we had the opportunity to have people come and talk to us about career day, but it was mostly jobs that you could get east side of Los Angeles. So it was being a cop, being, or a fire, like, like the first responder stuff, or, being a mechanic, being, like a mechanic at NASA, which is still cool. But it was one of those things like, hey, you could get work in the east side of LA, where, like, that's where we call like real jobs are. But I always kind of knew I wanted to be like, I want to work in Hollywood. Like, how do I get a job over there? I didn't know what kind of work it was, but I knew, like, from watching, all the Disney shows and all the behind the scenes stuff that you got to see, especially growing up watching Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. Sometimes they had these interstitials of like, hey, this is how we make the cartoon. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I want to work in that. So
yeah, for me, it was the book, The Art of Star Wars.
Oh, nice.
My mom bought me that book at a yard sale. And if you've ever seen it, it has the entire script. It has all the concept art. It has how they built the models. And that just blew my mind. Like, wow, okay, so this is how they do it. Yeah. But at the time, I didn't know that each one was like a different department. I thought if you were making movies, you did all of that stuff, right? So you had to know how to build all the models. You had to know how to do special effects. You had to know how to draw storyboards. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of work.
That's exactly what like, I guess when I was 15, I was like, all right, I got to learn how to do backgrounds. I got to learn how to paint. I got to learn how to film. So when I was 15, I was trying to consume everything that I could, but I was kind of burning myself out too, because I was like, I don't know what I need to do. I just want to draw. So luckily, we had this this program called, like, I can't remember what the actual name is, but it's to show kids to stop smoking or not smoke. And you got to animate like a 30-second piece for one day with, and you have a team of artists. And I was so excited. This is in middle school, right? He goes, I want to do that. I'm excited. Like, I know that's what I want to get into. And one of my English teachers told me, no, you're fine. You don't need to go do that. Like, you don't want to be a starving artist. And like that, like, it motivated me more to be like, I'm going to show that teacher that I'm not going to be a star. I'm going to show them that I'm going to work in this industry. And then, fast forward 3 years later, my senior year in high school, that program comes back. And right away, I told my teacher, I was like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. He goes, if I don't do this, I'm going to go talk to the principal. I'm going to talk to whoever I need to talk to. And they're like, no, yeah, dude, of course. Like, go ahead, do it. And this was already me, like, turning in homework and doing some doodles, trying to hope to get extra credit. But I got to learn and I got to work with who I thought were like actual animators, but they're all college students. But still, they kind of talked to me and they pointed me in the right direction. I was like, yeah, you have what it takes. You just got to draw more. I think one of the instructors told me, like, you got to draw a lot and don't show those drawings to anyone. And I didn't understand. I was like, well, how am I going to get better if I'm not going to show them to people? Like, how are they not going to critique me? But it took years for me to kind of realize, like, yeah, you're right. You need to get rid of those 1,000 drawings inside of you in order to get to that 1,001. Be like, all right, now I know what I'm doing. And that helped me out a lot because I would carry sketchbooks out, draw, close my book. I even had like cousins like, hey, what are you drawing? I was like, no, I'm not drawing anything. But down the line, like all my primos and friends, like, hey, draw this tattoo. It got to the point I was like, all right, fine. If I draw it for you, I'm gonna, you got to pay me for it. Because at the time I was at the point where this was already after high school. I was like, I could do tattoos, and I saved up enough money doing these drawings. Like I was drawing like, Zapata or Pancho Villa, black and white. And I tried to shade because one of my cousins showed me how to shade. He was in prison. So
nice.
Oh yeah, so this is how I wasn't that good. But
did you ever do any laugh now, cry laters?
I did nice. A few of those. And then what's funny enough, a lot of Chuckies from Rugrats. But, I started doing tattoos and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying to learn from watching videos and I took an apprentice course at this tattoo shop for a day, because then after he asked me, I had to pay him $6,000 to take a longer course for a year, and I was like, I don't have that money.
Yeah.
I was like 18. My plan was to work, but I just started doing tattoos on my friends and neighbors, and like they're probably just a step below like the prison tattoos, because they were all kind of crooked. I drew a Garcia on my neighbor's back, and it was just like
well, you can't see it.
Yeah, and like all the lines were all hatched. And then, that's when I realized, like, you know what, I need to go to college. I need to get into this industry, because I knew I wanted to work in animation, but it wasn't until I was, my goal was always like animation. I didn't know how to do it. So I got a job at Disneyland. One of my uncles got me a job there, and I was a bar back at a hotel. And I was like, maybe this could be my step into this industry. And, talking to some of the leads and everything, I was like, this is my ultimate goal. And what are you doing here? Like, you're not going to draw here. I was like, yeah, don't you guys have like people drawing over there? I was like, yeah, but go talk to them and they'll tell you, like, they just draw these characters all day long. And like, you should see their hands, that they run it under hot water. Because if you go to any of the shops, like one of the shops at Disneyland, like you could buy original art by some of the artists working there. And even now, like if you walk into one of the, as soon as you walk in to Disneyland, to your right, there's an area where they're still drawing, and you can still go in there and buy that stuff, which I always thought was awesome, especially going to Disneyland. I was like, that's so cool. I always thought they were actually animating like movies and stuff, but then like they realized, like, no, they're just drawing that character, and then they move on to another character. I was like, oh, okay. But I think the thing that really sparked my idea to, like, I know what I want to do, was watching Samurai Jack. On Cartoon Network.
Show that was dope.
Yeah, that show just blew my mind. And like after the first episode, I looked into going to college, and I think the next week I begged my parents, and I was like, I want to go to this college. This is it was the Art Institute of Los Angeles in Santa Monica, and I had I didn't make a portfolio. I just had a sketchbook with some of my best art. I tore some of the other pages and put them all in there. So when I showed it to them, I was like, I want to work. I want to come here. I want to learn animation. And this was a red flag, but I didn't know it at this time. The person that was looking through my art, he said, wow, this is really good. You could actually draw. And he's like, you're way better than any of the kids here that I've seen this year. And like that was, to me, that was like, holy cow, that's cool. And that was one of my first steps of like realizing, like, all right, I know I gotta work harder, and echale ganas, like the way my dad would always say it. And I did. Like every opportunity I had was I never saw it as like I was competing with anybody else more than just myself. I always try to outdo what I already done. So I always had that mentality of like, all right, I could outdo myself for the next round. And that's something that I still carry on today, that I'm always trying to be a step above of what I did before. So like I'm never trying to plateau. I'm always climbing up. And it's always something like I always tell my artists, and I always tell my coworkers is, if you feel like you're plateauing, like you always have room to learn. Like play around. Like don't just like give up and just like, oh, I was thinking of doing this, but I didn't do it. It's like, no, do it, pitch it. That's one of the best things about working in animation. It's like we're all collaborating, and if an idea sparks in you, go ahead and do it, because that's where the best ideas come from. And that's one thing that I got to learn as an artist was like, hey, if I draw Scooby-Doo this way, what if I draw him, what if I add this, or what if I add this eyeball? And that's what a lot of the best thing is. Like you learn from different artists and you just combine it, and you kind of like, I like this joke from Samurai Jack, but also like this joke from, you know, Charlie Brown. And he was like, what if we did something like this? And that's like the whole, you know, Samurai Jack. It's very UPA, but very action. So it's like it's like a menudo pot of all the best stuff into one show.
What's UPA for the listeners?
Oh, so UPA is like the style of show, like very Flintstones, Jetsons,
with like those bold out.
It was more of like just cut out animation.
Yeah.
But well done. Yeah. So it's like very like you just see the hand move, like the head stays still, like the mouth just. That's why a lot of the characters had like mouthpieces. Mm-hmm. So like Yogi Bear had this white piece. The Flintstone, Fred Flintstone had like that 5 o'clock shadow that wasn't a 5 o'clock.
Yeah, he had the line here from his nose down.
Yeah. Like the smile lines that were permanent. So that was just for them to have the animation kind of move up and down. So that was one thing that was very successful for a lot of people. And you know,
the one thing that I always noticed watching like the old Hanna-Barbera stuff was the repeating use of the backgrounds. Mm-hmm. So when they would take off running and you would see the same background fly past a few times. Or even as a kid, I always noticed the reuse of I didn't know what to call it, but Disney does that a lot with their character movement, right? They'll have certain characters move a certain way or do a certain dance, and you'll see that same exact movement happen in different movies with different characters.
Yeah. That was like in the 60s.
Yeah.
70s. I think it was just them trying to find a cheaper way. I'm sure there's a video out there that explains why, but it's just money wise, what costs less. Like it's already done. Yeah. You know, let's just do it.
Well, speaking of money wise, the thing that I really love about animation or illustration, comic books in general is you're only limited by your imagination, right? So unlike filmmaking, where if you're going to tell this epic story of these giant battles, or if you're going to tell the story of the fall of Tenochtitlan, or you're going to tell like Star Wars or something, you know, if you made a movie, you would need so much money that, you know, it's impossible to do it on your own. Whereas animation or comic books, you know, all of this software, all of these, you know, programs that are available have kind of democratized it and made it more accessible to where if you've got an idea, it's a lot more cost effective, you know, to draw this giant monster that you've imagined in your head instead of like, well, how are we going to do this in a movie, you know, in a live action movie? Animation, your only limit is your imagination, right? You could tell all these stories.
Yeah, man. And there's a lot of artists out there right now that, you know, there's a group of artists from Mexico. It's a team. One of the main directors, Humberto Erogoyen, and his crew of like, they all live around like, you know, I think they're all spread apart in South America. And they do these like commercials on the side. And they did a commercial for Invisalign, but the commercial, like they animated this whole crazy, like full on anime action style with simplistic characters. And I was just like, this is for Invisalign? Like, oh my God, this belongs in theaters. That's how gorgeous it is. And they just did it from home. And so like, we all have the filmmaking at our fingertips. Mm-hmm. So like you said, it's all about imagination, but sometimes working in industry, you do need to kind of collaborate with other animation studios.
Yeah, for sure.
To animate your episodes or movies or whatever it is. And sometimes you kind of hope that like, hey, you know, we talked about this film that, you know, you thought it was gonna be grounded, but guess what? There's all kinds of crazy cool stuff in here. Like there's this fucking giant monster and there's all this kind of crazy stuff and colors and lights and everything. So can you still do it for the same price? But sometimes, you know, obviously they're gonna like, whoa, we didn't sign up for this. Yeah. So there's like a good like balance of having a good team that we could make sure we give them every shot they need, so it's a lot simpler for them to kind of just dive in there and start working, or just do some doodles and like, hey, can you guys figure it out? But I always approach it as like, hey, let's be up front and try to deliver whatever we need, every pose, every extra line of dialogue we need to add, or backgrounds, or anything that we need to add in there, effects. That way they know what we're doing or what we want, and they don't have to second guess. And like, you know, we don't want to go back and forth on retakes. Retakes are when they send final animation. It's like, oh, hey, that didn't work out. Like, you know, match this pose instead. So I'll draw it live and we'll send it over to them. Mm-hmm. So that's called a retake.
Well, Cartoon Brew put out this article, I think a year ago, that got shared a lot online. A celebration of the Mexican artists who helped create the American animation industry. And it goes through all of these names, you know, guys like Bill Melendez, whose real name was like Cuauhtemoc, by the way, which is badass. I wish he would have kept that name professionally. But just learning that, man, there were like Mexican Americans and Mexicans and Chicanos involved in the animation industry, like since forever. But you know, do you find yourself as, you know, on the as a director, because you've started as a storyboard guy, and then I guess you move up, right? Producer, director. Are there fewer Chicanos now? Like, do you encounter a lot of Chicanos, or are you usually like the only Chicano in the room during some of these meetings?
So when I worked on Loud House, I worked on the first 4 seasons of Loud House as a storyboard artist. That's where I became a director at the end. I was the only Latino board artist at the studio. And we, there's a few people that were peppered around, and then on the Loud House crew, we had this really awesome artist named Sadie Figueroa, who's a color stylist. She makes sure all the characters, when she colors them, they don't blend into the background colors. So that's what a color stylist does. So it's very hard work. So she's amazing, and she has a good eye for that. And it was just her and I, and maybe 3 other people of color. So working in this industry was something that I noticed right off the bat. Was like, whenever I walk into a room, I always look around and see like, all right, I'm looking for the people of color, or, just looking for anyone that I could probably relate to, because I still stutter when I'm around white people. So it was always something that I never grew up. I grew up in East LA. It was maybe outside of Mexico was one of the most Mexican places outside of Mexico in the 90s and 80s. So working in the industry, you get to work with people that are coming from all over the world and all over the United States. And it's kind of hard to find people that are local artists, like local as like Californians. And that's one thing I noticed right off the bat. I was like, wow, there's not that many people here. So I started this outreach program with Carson Smith, who I didn't start it. He approached me. I was like, hey, do you want to go talk to some of these kids in Burbank, California? That's where our studio's at. And if you don't know what Burbank is on the other side of the Hollywood sign. And that's where like a lot of industry people live, either there or Studio City. So initially I did a few of those classes, or where I spoke to kids in classes, and I always got the same remark from kids where like, oh yeah, my dad does that stuff too. Like, oh, my dad's our screenwriter, or like shit like that. And I'm always like, what the fuck? Like, why don't
these kids don't need my help?
I mean, there's some schools that like off to the foothills of Burbank that I noticed like, well, there's a lot of brown kids here. That's cool. Like, so that was super helpful, like talking to them, because I felt at home. So I told Carson, and I was like, hey man, why can't we do this stuff to, you know, schools in East LA or you know, even more east than that, like people that don't know this industry. Because growing up, I didn't know I could get a job in Hollywood. Like no one ever talked to me about this stuff. So like now that we have this opportunity, like let's go do this. Let's bring kids to the studio. Like I don't want to go into their school. I want to bring kids over here. Let them know like, hey, this is a real job. We could actually do it. So I was doing them like once a week on top of my storyboarding duties. And I don't even like, I was pretty late on a few episodes, but it was, you know, for me, it was worth it because I was, you know, as long as I sparked one kid's, you know, mind to be like, I want to work in this industry, I did my job. And that was like the goal that Carson always set out to do. Like, as long as you're talking to 800 kids and there's only one kid that's like, I want to work in animation, like you're done, you're good. And I was doing that I still do it every once in a while. But one thing that when we were making Casagrandes, I was in the room with all the Loud House crew. And one of the first things I said was like, I want to get more quote unquote brown people in this in this crew and in this studio. And it was so quiet. Like everything was like so uncomfortable, and I was like, "Oh, yeah. I'm sorry."
What the hell does that mean?
So when I had to re-explain myself, I was like, "Well, I want to bring in more people to not only represent the show we're making, but also if we're going to showcase the BIPOC people on the screen, I want them to be represented in the crew too." And one of the first things a producer told me was like, well, we just can't find them. And I was like, well, you're just not asking the right people. The next day I turned in 300 names. And out of the 300 names, we ended up hiring like 30.
Nice.
So that was one of my first things that I wanted to bring into this industry and to the Nickelodeon was we need more people that like no excuses of like, oh, we just can't find them. You need to work a little bit harder. And now they call it like, you know, now at Nickelodeon, like this industry's getting more diverse, which is awesome because what sucks is a lot of people don't get this opportunity all the time. And we have like these young creatives that just graduated college and people don't give them the same opportunity, or if they do, they lowball them. They pay them so less. That's one of the things I found out at this one of the shows I was working on. I'm not going to say which one, that a lot of the brown people were getting paid less than some.
Damn.
And so
that's fucked up.
I just, you know, that kind of worms opened up, and you know, luckily the studio that was at, they helped, they changed the course. I'm like, no, we didn't make this right. And you know, at Nick, there's so many awesome people working at the studio that, you know, it's getting bigger and better every day.
Nice. Well, I keep joking with you, man. We're going to turn it into Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I can't joke about that stuff because then they'll send me to Nickelodeon boarding school again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so, you know, being able to provide, first of all, that's badass that you were able to do that. And, but did you have any like mentors or people that were looking out for you? Like, were there any Chicanos or Mexican Americans or anybody that was like, hey, bro, I'm going to help you through this and help you navigate this? Or did you kind of have to figure it out on your own?
When I first started, I reached out to Jorge Gutierrez, who's a creator of El Tigre. He also directed Book of Life and recently Maya and the Three on Netflix. I would just reach out to him, and he was an awesome dude. And just for him to reach out back meant so much to me, even though like I didn't meet him in person until like 4 years ago at Nickelodeon. And he's always someone that I talk to here and there. Like he'll give me ins and outs, like what to do and how to self-promote myself, because that's one thing that I never did. I was kind of like, I don't want to be that person that's like, hey, I'm posting every day. type of person, but I see how it's kind of beneficial to like just put your name out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Still got to work on it though, but he was an awesome person. And then the other person was Eric Robles, who created Fanboy and Chum Chum, and then he also had over at Nickelodeon was Glitch Text that came out on Netflix, and he was the only Chicano at the studio that was in the producer role.
Wow.
And even on the Loud House, when I helped develop Casagrandes, I didn't have representation at all when I did this, so I was hoping, just because people were cool and not assholes, they would keep me along on the ride and like, hey Miguel, like since you pitched your family, like this is your family, and there's some, this is some cool stuff. Like the two writers that I worked with, I'm gonna give a shout out to them, Sammy Crowley and Whitney Weta. They were so amazing that they took what I pitched and they made what the Casa Grande was. Also, like, it's a collaboration. We're all pitching ideas. We all work together to make this awesome thing for at first it was like a one-off episode for Loud House. And after we pitched the episode to the network, they loved it. I was like, hey, this could be a potential, spin-off show, but let's kind of pepper some more episodes in the seasons. So I was like, all right, cool. And like in my head, I was like, I'm gonna get to collaborate and work with them again. No, they kept me out of it, and they made sure I didn't have any part of it, because I was like, well, why can't I do it? I'm like the only Chicano here. Like, I did pitch this idea, and I'm the reason why Ronnie Ann is Latina, because the creator of Loud House, I saw what Ronnie Ann was going to look like. She was going to look like a redheaded girl with the yellow trench coat. And I was like...
Because she was only referenced before, right?
Yeah, the first episode I ever worked on was Heavy Metal, and she was only referenced. She was never shown. And she was like a bully to Lincoln, but it was because she had a crush on him. And when I finally saw what he had in mind for Ronnie Ann, at this time I already had my daughter. She was like maybe about 1 year old. And I was like, wait, why can't she be Latina? Like, we only have one other Latino person, and it's Bobby. So, like, why don't we make it like a bigger thing? And then they made Ronnie Ann Bobby's sister. So there's only one Latino family.
Yeah.
Who ended up moving away. But it was one of those things that kind of, I went to Eric Robles to talk to, and he called it out the way it was going to go down, and unfortunately I kind of got screwed with that. And there's been a whole investigation and just like a lot of talks, a lot of interviews, and now that's why I became Casagrandes. I became developed by, and I became the co-EP on the series.
And EP being executive producer.
Executive producer. So that's one thing that it took a while to get, but but
that's huge. Like, you don't see a lot of Chicano executive producers in any, aspect of the film industry.
Yeah,
like, that seems like a huge rarity.
It was, and it was something I fought for, like, very hard. And I spoke to Eric Robles and Jorge Gutierrez. They all like cheered me on. They were like, dude, you got to fight for it. Even Jorge invited me to hop on My End 3 when we were at a point where Casagrandes was maybe going to get made into a spinoff show, or maybe not. And I said, like, no, you know what? You do your thing. I'm going to try to stay here and do my thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I should have left, because the way I was being treated, or the way I was not being invited to the table where all the decisions were made.
Yeah.
It was something that was
when I first got involved on the projects that you brought me on. I can't remember one of the writers. I was watching videos, because I'm the kind of guy that, when I'm going to get involved with something, I research the hell out of it and I jump in like 100%. So I was watching all of these Nickelodeon videos that they have about the process of storytelling, how stories are told at Nickelodeon, the 5-act structure, all of these different things. The button, how you use a button in the stories and all that. So I'm like, I don't want to look like a pendejo in these meetings and like, what the hell are you guys talking about? So I researched everything, and there was this one writer who she said, it's more than having a place at the table. It's having our own table, right? And that really, made me happy to hear that, because that's kind of been my, idea as well, growing up in the Chicano movement as like this punk rock kid, the DIY aesthetic, just do it yourself. That was the thing that my mom always pushed on me. Like, and I would say, how come there's no Chicano comic books? And she'd be like, well, make one. How come there's no, well, make one. What are you waiting for? You don't need anybody's permission to do it. Just do it. And that kind of drove me. So hearing that come from this writer at Nickelodeon, I was like, hell yeah. So it made me excited, even more excited to be a part of this process, right?
Was it Rebecca Delgado?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
Who you should have on this talk, because she'll talk your ear off on all the ins and outs of industry stuff. Like she's amazing. And we actually worked together on the same thing that we're picking up. But it's something that helped me out a lot, and the support with some of the Chicanos that I got to work with was, they all kept pushing me and like, dude, you got to do this on your own. You got to get representation, fight for this stuff. And then when I found out that they weren't going to give me any consulting duties on the Casagrandes,
it's like a slap in the face.
That was like a bigger slap in the face. And then they're like, well, do you know anyone that could be a consultant? And I was like, yeah. So I've heard of them. I knew he was a big old troublemaker, and I needed a bigger asshole in there to get in trouble. So I called up Lalo Alcaraz, and he came in.
Shout out Lalo.
Okay, kicked open doors and got in trouble more than I did. And he was like a soup. Like when he came in, it was something that I was already a big fan of his, and it was something that I knew was like, well, now that there's two of us in here, like they can't kick us out. Like we're something special, and it's gonna be,
we're like Brown Voltron.
Yeah, and the Mexican Brown Power Rangers, and it was between him and I. We were going back and forth with some of the writers' room on the Loud House. There's not one person of color in that room, but there was a lot of support for us, and we would clash our heads with some of the higher ups, and there was always this thing was like, it's not, we don't want to alienate anybody else in this industry. I was like, well, yeah, we're not gonna, or in the audience, like, so we had to make sure we went with the approach of making it universal for everyone. Mm-hmm. And between Lalo and the writers and I, we got it to where it was at. I know it's very like, we were tiptoeing in those Loud House episodes, but when it got to the Casagrande episodes, it was like a full-on documentary inside a Mexican-American home. It was like, hey, what'd you do for Christmas? Or like, how'd you do work on this? And I was like, hey, we did this and we did that. And that's how we pitched episodes. At first, it was like, oh, hey, cultural episodes. We had like 2 or 3 in season 1. And we always heard the same thing, like, well, we already did one like that. We already did a cultural episode. I was like, yeah.
It's like, this is like our day-to-day lives,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. Like, you just can't say abuela like 13 times in an episode and make it.
Well, I remember, do you remember the old Incredible Hulk cartoon?
No.
It was Spider-Man and the Amazing Friends, and then they had the Incredible Hulk.
I've seen it. I've seen it a couple times.
And there were like there was a Chicana in it, right? There was like these Mexican characters in it. And it would always bug the hell out of my parents because I would watch it because I was like, there are no other brown people on TV. I'm going to watch the Hulk. Plus, I loved the Hulk. But I remember the dad, he would always say, mi hija, my daughter.
Yeah.
Like they would directly translate after everything they said. And it bugged the shit out of my parents so much.
Yeah, that was one of our rules, like not to make it like Dora. And you go,
yeah.
Ven aquí, come here. You know, it was always ven aquí, we'll do a hand signal. And that was it.
Yeah, there's other ways to do it, right? And then you see what happens.
Yeah.
So the kids anybody who doesn't speak Spanish, then they're like, oh, well, obviously that's what that means. It's not, I mean, come on. People watch movies where people are speaking Elven and Orc and stuff without subtitles. They figured it out. They can do it with Mexicans.
Yeah, no, and kids are hungry. Kids are hungry to learn because kids are like sponges, so they want to learn this stuff. Like when we would test some of these episodes out, we had kids that were like in like Wisconsin talking about, like, oh yeah, my best friend is Mexican, and I remember seeing her mom having chanclas under her bed. And they looked like they could hurt, and it was like little things like that. I was like, that's funny. She was cool about it. She was excited, and that's one thing that kids want to see themselves represented on TV.
Well, I'll tell you what, my nephew Christopher loves the Casagrandes.
Nice.
So
awesome.
Shout out Christopher.
Ooh, thank you, Christopher. Kids are hungry to see themselves represented on TV, and they can smell right away, just like that Hulk cartoon, if it's authentic or not.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell when it's something like, oh, this is cool. And then you see all the names. I'm like, oh, wait, which white people? But
yeah. That was the cool thing about that Turning Red was like the Pixar, just watching the credits afterwards and just seeing all the names. And I'm like, damn, that's why it worked. That's why it worked so well.
Yeah. Have you watched Miss Marvel?
I haven't started it yet.
It's amazing. Like we all watch it as a family, and it's about a Pakistani family, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel left out. I feel like, wow, this is cool. I feel like it's so the way it's shot, the way it's like they introduce the culture and everything. Like they have subtitles here and there, but it's still like it's funny. Like characters remind me of my family.
Well, authenticity, creates that connection, right? Like you feel connected to something if it's authentic. Yeah. Even if you're not from that culture, you see those similarities and you could sense the authenticity, and it makes it more meaningful and impactful. Like people always talk about representation. Like that's the big thing, representation matters, and it does. But it has to be authentic. Yeah. It's like you said, kids especially, they could sniff it out.
Yeah, and it has to be authentic all around. In the writer's room, we need that safe space in that room so artists could feel like they could share their most intimate stories that are going to make this awesome episode. Even if it's just a nugget of an idea, it's something that's going to just make it feel awesome. And that's one thing we need in those rooms, and it's kind of hard to get because you have different egos, different personalities come in, and a lot of the people are like, I'm the best writer here. So there's a lot of clash, there's a lot of separations in those rooms, but you also need the full support of your higher ups as well, even if they question every little thing. You got to re-explain it over and over and over again. Like sometimes that takes half your day of re-explaining what, a tlacoche is or but as long as people are willing to learn, that's even better. Because that's one thing, my approach was always like, I don't want to obviously make these episodes universal, but I'm doing it for the kids that want to learn. If we're making cartoons for kids that only want to stick to one thing and just like have tunnel vision for one thing, I was like, they could watch something else on a different network.
Mm-hmm.
This where we're going now. We're making everything for everyone, and I hope one day, like, you know, Casagrandes sparks another, you know, BIPOC kid to tell their own story, and hopefully they end up working at Nickelodeon or some other studio, and they end up doing that because, like, they saw, you know, Casagrandes, just as I was inspired by watching cartoons as a kid, like, you know, watching Rocco's Modern Life and seeing how funny it was. And in Rocco, there's a character, the big heads that live next door to Rocco, their son worked in the animation industry, and he had like this really popular cartoon. And I connected with that. I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, that's what I want to do. And so it's stuff like that. Like, there's all kinds of cartoons out there that I still watch today with my daughter. Like, even though my daughter is so busy on her phone now. She's 9. She'll be 9 in a couple months, but it's always like, hey, let's sit down and just watch cartoons. And when
well, you know what I really enjoy doing, and it was always big in my family, was sitting down and watching Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
They're so funny. And then the backgrounds on some of those episodes are like modern art masterpieces.
Yeah.
Like, you could just take one of the backgrounds and frame it and throw it up on a wall, and people would be like, whoa, what is that?
Yeah.
And not even know, well, this was a background from, you know, Duck Dodgers or something.
Yeah, Maurice Noble.
Yeah.
One of the painters, like, amazing. And like these people went to like university and they studied in like Paris and stuff, and they're making backgrounds for cartoons. But there's so much, there's like this visual language and all those backgrounds that just help you focus your where the director or the filmmakers want you to focus on. And there's this language in there that that is something that I love and I love to do to this day, is like, how do I want the audience to feel about this scene? Or how do I want the audience to kind of feel about this character at this moment in time? Like, you know, I always use the phrase, like, I want the kids to be on their edge of their butt on this scene. So that's something when I want to go big, like something epic, especially third acts, we got to crank it up. And like, what are kids going to do, or how are they going to feel? I always try to, whenever I'm drawing or whenever I'm picking out shots, I try to put myself in, you know, 10-year-old Miguel and seeing what I would want to see when I was 10. And that's always my approach, is like, how do I impress myself? How do I?
Well, you sent me like a rough animatic of something from one of the projects we were doing, and it blew me away. Like, it like sent chills down my spine. I was like, oh shit, I want this to exist now. Yeah. So, and I got to tell you, man, I've always felt supported by you. Like, I've always felt like you had my back on these projects. So I really appreciate that, because it means something, even though I'm an old man. I'm not a young up and comer, but
no, I don't switch codes. I don't like, this is who I try to be for everyone. Like, even if you're just starting out or you've been in the industry, like, I'm always someone I try to support everyone that I can, as long as you're not an asshole, you know?
Yeah.
It's something that I'm always, because we're working in this industry. We're making stuff that this is our dreams, you know? This is our dreams that we've been dreaming of as a kid, and now that we're actually doing it, it doesn't feel like work. And that's
exactly right.
Yeah. So it's always, for me, it's always like, we made it, but how do we make our dreams even bigger? How do we add more to this? Like, what's our next step? Like, it's always, for me, like, planning the next goal. Like, what I want to work on, like a movie, a feature, maybe, or, you know, get into live action. Probably not, but that's something I eventually want to get my foot in, just so I could, you know, just have every opportunity to do whatever I always wanted to do, and just entertain people. And not only entertain them, but maybe, you know, put a mark in this industry of like, hey, this is how it was growing up in Boyle Heights, or this is how it is in a Mexican American home, or, you know, this is how it is, you know, some Mesoamerican history in there, or even telling like simple stories of, just these fun little things that are just going to inspire more kids.
Yeah. So speaking of inspiring kids, if for all the Chicanos, Chicanas, Chicanx kids out there, or even, the older kids listening right now, if you had one piece of advice to give them, what would it be?
Probably keep drawing, keep building your dreams up, because everyone that is working in some type of field of whoever you're looking up at, if it's a basketball player, a senator, or Kurly, or a director, like Steven Spielberg, they all started with the dream. And so find out how they got to that dream. Like it was either they worked hard, or what school they went to, or what they had, what opportunities they had in front of them. That was one thing that I did when I first started off, was how did, Gendy Tartakovsky work in animation? And he's a creator of Samurai Jack, and he went to Cal Arts. He always drew. He was an immigrant from Russia. He came down here with his family, and then he went to Cal Arts. He watched cartoons. That's how he learned how to speak English. And, at the same time, like I just remember, like with my dad, we would watch Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry, because they didn't speak and Tom and Jerry, they didn't speak English. So it was something that it could be a universal cartoon for everyone. And just laughing and seeing that is something that I always worked hard on. And so that was my dream. And every opportunity that I could do is I would draw. And even if it means, as an artist, you have a small sketchbook in your car, have a small sketchbook in your room, in the bathroom, anywhere, put down your phone every now and then and just sketch. I still do that from now. Like, even if it's like small little doodles. I don't know if you're going to show this, but they look like boxes, but those are they're characters. I'm just blocking out shots in my head. But it's something that one of the advices I could do is just find out how your heroes got to where they're at, and maybe, I'm not saying you could follow in their steps, but at least there's a path.
Yeah.
And there's a path in anything, just like in Marvel Comics. That's why I got into Marvel Comics, is everything felt grounded. Everything felt like I could get bit by a radioactive spider. I wasn't born like a super mega rich millionaire and become Batman, or I come from another planet. Although sometimes I wish, I was like, man, did I come from another? But it just felt like something that was reachable, that I could do. And I always had that mentality. I was like, it's just 12 minutes away. Hollywood's just 12 minutes away from my house. Like, I'm gonna work there. So set those goals. Like, even if you're just a few states away, or across another country, or another, East Coast, there's so much opportunity. And if you ever want to work in this industry, reach out to me. I'm pretty approachable, even though it'll take me a while to get back to you, but I'll make sure I always reach back to whoever hits me up.
I'm going to put your phone number in the show notes. So real quick, I got one last question for you, then I'll let you go.
Cool.
As a Chicano in animation, Speedy Gonzalez, yes or no?
No.
No? You don't like Speedy Gonzalez?
I mean, he was, all right, here's the thing. He was fine. He was funny, because I grew up in a Mexican community. Like, I grew up all my life hearing people that, like, not hearing people that talk like that, but when I did, I was like, yeah, he's Speedy Gonzalez. But when I got to college and it was not as diverse and people talking like Speedy Gonzalez, I was like, wait, no, that's not right, dude. Like, come on. It was like the whole Dave Chappelle approach of,
like, doing it in a mocking way, you mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And when I had that Chicano, East LA, blood in, blood out accent growing up. And it comes in and out of here and there, but I think I've been jaded working in the industry that I kind of lost it, but it still comes out once in a while. But I remember people just coming up to me like, hey, what's up? Like, what's up, homie? And I was like, I'm not your homeboy. Like, what the fuck? Don't call me homie. Or they'll just like speaking like the Speedy Gonzalez or his primo.
Slowpoke.
Yeah, Slowpoke. Hey, Speedy.
Who always looked high, by the way. Slowpoke Rodriguez, high. I think, was supposed to be high all the time.
I actually have a shirt of him with the blood. But he was always high, and that's one thing that I was just like, all right, are you mocking me? And,
yeah, right.
And so that's why I don't have anything against Speedy Gonzalez, but it was, now if you look,
it could definitely be used to belittle and mock people for sure.
Yeah. Especially I was one of the tallest Chicanos in the school, and so I was like, "Fuck you! I'm not short. Like I'm tall. My whole family's tall." So it was.
Yeah, you're a tall dude, man. I remember when we met in person. I was like, "Damn, this dude's tall." I'm also very short, though. Even for a Chicano, I'm pretty short.
I got the old Mike Maceta, but yeah.
Well, right on, man. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me and hopefully inspire some people out there, to pursue their dreams, whatever they might be, whatever industry they might want to work in, because, representation does matter, and it matters most when we're representing ourselves, right? That's
true. And there's this great thing called, I know you don't like the name, Kurly, but Latinx in animation. They work with so many other groups, especially La Leaf, which is Latinos. And I don't even know what it actually means, but it's Edward James Olmos, Rafael Agustin, and they all work in live action, and they all have like these Latino film festival. They just had one like maybe 2 months ago or 2 weeks ago. But it's great opportunity to find that stuff out and figure out like, wow, there's so many of us working, and hopefully the more we have this, the more we have more people come into this industry. Like our names are going to be in the big blockbuster movies. And
yeah. And for everybody, who is in the industry or who wants to get into the industry, we really need to knock it off where we're, so hypercritical of each other, and so eager to because one of the first things that happened when I got into stunts, and I'd wanted to be a stuntman, and I got into it, and I'm making all these cool shows, and right away online I see like, oh, Kurly's a vendido. It's like, geez, thanks for the support, guys. It's only been like my dream, but thank you very much for supporting this dream of mine.
I've always been called the white Mexican.
Oh, really?
And it was always sitting like, what the fuck? Fuck you. Goes, I'm doing more for La Cultura than you are. What are you doing? Working at UPS? No.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with you.
I know. There's nothing wrong
Shout out UPS.
But it was always something that I always grew up with, because my mom was light-skinned. My dad was, he had that pura picha blood, red skin. And I came out looking like my dad, but with my mom's skin color and colored eyes, and my brothers were all like darker than me. And every time, even playing as a kid, we all picked our skin tone on the crayons, and they would always give me the either beige or pink. And I was like, fuck you guys.
Well, bro, I want to thank you again for taking the time to come on the podcast and talk with us about Chicanos in animation. Hopefully, we're going to get to announce the 2 projects that we are working on at Nickelodeon very soon, because I'm super excited for people to finally see them. And for our listeners, I want to say Tlaskamati. Thank you for listening. If you want to support the show, please consider going to talesfromastlantis.com or chimali.org and signing up as a Patreon supporter. Starting at $3 a month, you're going to get ad-free episodes. You'll get premium episodes only for our Patreon supporters. You'll get access to our Discord community and a bunch of other cool stuff. So until next time, this has been Kurly Tlapoyawa with special guest Miguel Puga.
And remember, the truth is like medicine. It doesn't always taste good, but it's always good for you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Astlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromastlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timo Itase.